Heidi-ho, Winklings! Welcome to an all-new First Issues, the weekly First Issues review show. These are the new number ones from the week of March 16, 2016. I'm the Archivist, and without any padding, let's hop right into this haul with Marvel's International Iron Man number 1, written by Brian Michael Bendis, art by Alex Maleev, and color art by Paul Mounts. So, Tony Stark is actually adopted. Though, to be fair to the ANAD universe, it was revealed he was adopted in 2013 in a convoluted mess of things. But this issue itself deals with him in his college years hitting on someone who will eventually become the antagonist for the present scenario, which is him trying to find out who his real birth parents are. While the writing for this isn't that bad, it's nothing special. And the art is good, being a style that I do really enjoy, though I feel it's out of place in an Iron Man book. Though in its defense, Iron Man only actually appears in his suit for the first and last pages. The only reason I say that it's here is because in my mind having the crisper artwork and lines for Iron Man works really well because of his technological leaning, but it is still decent art. My verdict is actually easy enough. It's worth a read if you like Iron Man as a character, but for a single issue, it's iffy on anything past reading as a fan of Iron Man. I personally am not a fan of Iron Man. I've never been able to get behind Tony Stark as a character, so take that for what it is. Also, who actually greenlit Arno Stark folding into the 616? Seriously, okay, let's move on before this turns into a rant. Quickly to Image Comics with Roche Limit Monadic number 1, story by Michael Morrissey, art by Kyle Charles, and colors by Matt Battaglia. First, I want to say I love the title. Roche Limit, while sounding cool, is basically how close a satellite can get to its primary body in space without being destroyed. Yes, I like space. Yes, I think that's an awesome title for any sci-fi series at all. I legitimately don't know how to summarize this in a couple minutes I have to talk about it, so screw it. It's the third series in the Roche Limit trilogy, so you can guess that there's a bit of history that will make it hard to come into as a first-time reader, especially since the characters are very much in the first and second series too. My verdict is that I do really like this issue, but I can't suggest reading it without checking out the last two series, which are also both really great reads. While I wouldn't call it straight-up hard science, it's also not a space opera. It's very Philip K. Dickian in its approach and can easily be filed under surrealist sci-fi, especially with how this issue leads into the final third of a trilogy. The art is also really good at conveying the writing, though it really isn't the best art out there and can be confusing at some points, so I don't even know what I'd label it as on my sliding scale. Readable with an asterisk? Sure, why not? Now onto a different kind of sci-fi with IDW's Transformers Deviations number 1, written by Brendan Easton, art by Priscilla Tramontano, with colors done between her and Jean-Paul Bove. Yes, everyone makes the joke that this deviation is actually what if Hot Rod didn't screw up, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen the Transformers movie. I know all about Optimus Prime's death, as everyone does, and that's the death that they're saying on the tin. Though I know of every other time Optimus has died, too. He dies at least once per generation. But anyways, what happens because of Optimus Prime not dying? Well, a lot of things that just basically build to the same end. I'll give only one spoiler, solely because I don't honestly know what the difference is. It's a bombastic and kind of insane read, after all. It does end with Rodimus Prime, with the spark of leadership or whatever it's called, so it is very roundabout in the same ending as the film. My verdict is obvious. Sort of in the same vein as the last deviation I covered last week with the X-Files, but even slightly more niche. I mean, it's about Transformers the movie universe, and while it's very nostalgically loved, I don't think a lot of people really want to see that continuity looked at again, not with the other great IDW comics coming out. However, if you are a fan of Transformers, even just the IDW comics, I think this is at least worth a read. It's a fun read, especially if you're a fan of the old school Transformers. It may be interesting if you're into Transformers the comics or the shows, and it's totally readable as a one-shot if you're a fan. It most likely won't drag you in if you are just a newcoming reader, randomly grabbing it, but otherwise it's definitely readable and won't hurt as a physical buy for posterity's sake. Speaking of deviations, here's Ghostbusters Deviation number 1, written by Kelly Thompson and art by Nelson Daniel. What if the Ghostbusters didn't cross the streams and save the day at the end of the Ghostbusters movie? Well, apparently Gozer will have stayed stuck in the Stay Puft Marshmallow form with adorable mini puffs, which are basically Kirby-looking puffs of marshmallowy hell. It's adorable terror. The plot is, a month after Gozer comes to power, the Ghostbusters are still trying to take him down, but even Gozer is on a bit of a please do side of things. The art is awesome, but that's par for the course with the IDW Ghostbusters, with the characters themselves being caricatures more than realistic interpretations, which works more to keep the comedy aspect of the book going. Which, believe me, this is written to be very much a comedy, and Thompson's writing flows great, feeling on par story-wise with the first film. It is without a doubt the biggest must-have on a universal sense, because come on, as Leslie Jones said herself, we all Ghostbusters. But enough with Marshmallow Men, time for Valiant Comics and A&A, Adventures of Archer and Armstrong, #1, written by Reefer Roberts, pencils by David LaFuente, inks by Ryan Wynn, and colors by Brian Reber. Armstrong is a hedonistic immortal who's been bombing around for a very, very long time. And Archer is a master martial artist and marksman. They're best buds and partners, even after some minor snafu with Archer wanting to kill the ultimate evil, which in turn turned out to be his jolly fat friend. However, that's not even something you need to know going into this. The plot is straightforward. Archer and Armstrong go into his magic bag of holding, and hijinks ensues. There's a stinger at the end, but that's definitely something you guys need to find out for yourselves. I don't get to talk about Valiant Comics a lot, but when I do, you can bet that I'm going to like it and love it. The writing for this is fun on a bun and works well even if you haven't read the previous run. The art and color pops off the page with vibrant colors, a crisp, cartoony yet realistic nature that really pushes the banter while keeping the fight scenes and action feeling very grounded and awesome. My verdict is easily buy this book. While, yes, it isn't the first adventure of Archer and Armstrong in the rebooted Valiant Comics, this handles that very well with a solid introduction to the cast of characters that won't leave you scratching your head as to what's going on, and it in fact walks that fine line of being interesting enough that you want to see what came before it, while not being hindered that you don't already know it. So definitely worth a solid buy. Next on the chopping block is from Lionforge Comics. Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs #1, written by Margaret Scott and art by Sendel Arts. Fun fact, I was originally going to open this up with a comment about how the cover looks totally like a knockoff of an 80s cartoon. But to my surprise, this is actually a licensed comic for a cartoon that aired in the late 80s. And boy does it feel it. In a good way. So quick plot dump, humans are now on the far stretches of space and the outskirts are very much in tune with the Old West, with star sheriffs acting as, well, sheriffs and marshals. And boy howdy do they like playing that up. This particular tale starts with them matching wits with a former colleague and even deputizing a bounty hunter in the process. I really had fun reading this, and it could easily be because of the nostalgia factor. Not that I watched the show, but with just the feel and everything really perked my inner child up from its coma. The art is very in line with the animation style, simple but effective. And the writing, I can't rightly say if it's close to the show or not, but it was a hoot for me. Saber Rider is a by-the-books lawman and Colt is a brash bounty hunter. They play off each other so well. I honestly think that this, at a bare minimum, is worth a read. It's a fun romp that does lay into exposition a little much. It's sort of expected, especially since you've got people like me who don't even know any prior information on it. I honestly think that it is worth considering to buy, as something like this could easily become a staple for any fan of 80s cartoon and comics. Also, spoiler, giant robot mech thing at the end. Sorry, I just needed to blurt that out. Up next is the Aspen comic, Santeria, The Goddess Kiss #1, created and written by David Wohl, pencils by Giuseppe Cefaro, and colors by Wes Hartman. Well, this issue was a bit wordy. This is very much an introductory essay to explain all about this particular religion's history and its modern-day practices, using an investigation into the present-day aspects to guide it along. And to me, it doesn't work. I'm sorry, I know there's others out here who will give it a positive, and it's not that it's bad, it really isn't. Plot-wise, it sets up what will happen, assumably, in the next 3 issues, so I shouldn't be harsh that it leads with a 7-page thesis paper on this and continues to speak of it and expounds throughout. The characters themselves also don't really feel natural in that they're just meant to drive the narrative, not be part of the narrative story, if that makes any sense. So yes, it is skippable, however, I will be checking it out after #4 comes out, since this issue was very much exposition. In the meantime, listen to some Sublime. Next we head to Dynamite Comics and Lords of the Jungle #1. Written by Karina Becto, illustrated by Roberto Castro, and colors by Alex Grimerez. Sorry about butchering that last name. Well, I've been waiting for a new Tarzan book from Dynamite for a long time now, and right on the front it says, featuring Tarzan and Sheena. Great googly moogly, yes! After reading this, I will say that it's a bit of a lie on the cover. Tarzan only appears in the last couple pages, with the rest of this book focusing on Sheena, which I think actually really makes sense. Sheena is a much lesser known character, so leading with her in present day, and then getting a fun portal to take her back to Africa, in what I assume is Tarzan's time, works really well. And this was a blast to read. While the majority of this issue is taken up with action, we still get a good grasp of what's going on and why things are happening. Sheena herself comes off as a strong protagonist, easily carrying the action and exposition without coming off stilted. And the art really plays well with the environment, which is something that a lot of jungle-based action set pieces sometimes can muddle, especially when we see it juxtaposed with good old London town and even the different jungle settings later on in the book. It's just really neat, so I definitely say that this is worth a buy, and I'm most definitely going to be following it. After the Dynamite, here comes the Boom Studios. Man, that was a weak transition. Anyway, here's Turncoat #1, written by Alex Paknadel, illustrated by Artem Trakhanov, and colors by Jason Wordy. Where the hell do I start? Okay. So the plot is, in a dystopian New York City, we follow a former cop turned private investigator on the case of a missing kid. Sounds simple enough, but that's the framework to explore this new world. What works best is that this setting is fairly unique. While it is a dystopian future, which we've seen a billion times, especially in New York City, it's not as Blade Runner as many other stories would go with it. It's actually about 5 years after an alien overmind called the Management leaves Earth, and that allows actually for some great politics to be pushed forth. And actually allows for some really unique art as well, because Management was a fungal-based life form, so instead of sleek iPod technology that typically comes about with these sorts of stories, you get awkward squishy tech like coral-looking projectors or stick-to-your-head cell phones, and of course the possibility of hybrid children. But that's for you to figure out by reading this. This was honestly the most surprising read I had, because when it started, I actually thought the art was kind of loose and I didn't like it all that much, but while reading, I got totally immersed. The lead character we follow, the reconstruction feel of the world, and the fact that the titular Turncoat is our lead character, and how she's written, and how not entirely black and white her betrayal really was, is just all superb. And yes, because of all that, even with the art not being the crispest or the most super bestest, I still think that this is definitely my top pick of the week. Though this week was actually really tough to make a decision. On to the last of the indie scene with IDW Publishing. Three Devils #1. Story and art by Bo Hampton, with colors by Jeremy Moeller. In 1873, a gypsy family is murdered right in front of their young daughter. She is found and saved by a former slave, and they head off into the sunset. But all things are not as they seem, as Marcus, the former slave, may be a bit more than just a badass. There's two genres of comics that I am a sucker for, military and western, so I'll admit that I may be a bit biased, as this issue doesn't necessarily go that extra mile, but what it does do is great. While it's not a western in the traditional sense, as both Marcus and Tara Lynn, the young gypsy girl, are not gunslingers, but rather just two outsiders wandering the land. And that's what works for it. But this is actually a Weird West genre, with the pale man who killed her family being a vampire, it seems, and Marcus apparently able to raise the dead, maybe. There's not a lot to really say about this. It is a great setup and actually works amazingly well to introduce these characters, the setting, and potential without needing to throw in a ton of exposition. Seriously, it is a legitimately good read and most definitely worth a buy in my book. If you aren't a fan of the Western setting, I still think you may get a kick out of this. So we can say that the official verdict is, at the very least, read it. And finally, let's take a quick look to DC Comics with Legends of Tomorrow #1. With 4 separate stories written by 4 separate creative teams. This book has nothing to do with the TV show like I originally thought it was going to be. I mean, they have tie-ins for every other show, but oddly this actually covers tales with Metamorpho, Sugar and Spike, the Metal Men, and the only character from the actual DC Legends of Tomorrow show, Firestorm. Now, all of these stories are actually really neat reads, and something I know a lot of people will like. I don't think they're set in the New 52. The art and writing all feel very reminiscent of post-crisis DC Comics. And then it got me thinking. See, DC is wrapping everything up because in 2 months, they're starting their whole DC Rebirth thing. So when I saw this in my pull list, I was really surprised to see a new #1 that wasn't a licensed tie-in. But while reading this, it really felt like this was meant to be something to tie in with Rebirth, or at least a test run writing-wise for some of the titles after that happens. It is honestly totally worth a buy for those that don't know anything about these characters, as it works well to introduce them and get you interested enough in their history and futures of these characters, but even more so, it's totally worth it for those that miss the post-crisis world and want to see the direction DC has been going. And that's the end of this edition of First Issues. Overall, this week was filled with great reads, and most of them were actually worthy of a buy, or at least I didn't have regrets for buying most of them. But stick around after these messages, we'll be right back with Flashback Firsty, this time with a Marvel comic. Welcome to Flashback Firsties. Today's comic was chosen by Daniel Wenzik, or rather he asked if I had read it on last week's First Issues, so I'm doing it now. Originally released on December 9th, 2015, this is Marvel Comics' Scarlet Witch #1, written by James Robinson, art by Vanessa Del Rey, and colors by Jordi Belair. So, witchcraft is broken. Not magic itself, but witchcraft. So the Scarlet Witch is on the case to find who broke it. Well, then helping out local PD with magic-based crime scenes, and all the while the, ghost of Agatha Harkness is helping her, apparently. Okay, maybe I missed that explanation. This series is most definitely a bit overambitious in what it wants to be, which is a globe-trotting adventure, and writing-wise, I could see how it'd work out. There's a lot of just exposition, which I think is why Agatha's there, because if not, then the dialogue would become a monologue, and with the narration doing that already, it would have just been a cluster. But that sort of points out the negative to all this. There is a lot of talking with nothing really happening, save for a couple pages of fighting a demon because there needed to be an action beat. As for the art, I both like and dislike it. Overall, the art isn't bad, and I do generally think it's decent. But there's just some ugly framing a few times, and a kind of puffy look to Wanda every so often that throws it off. It's not bad art per se, but I personally found that those small moments were just noticeable enough to make it Yes, I know that I just spent a lot of time going, it's not bad, but honestly that I think I'll be checking out the next couple issues, which are already out, obviously. It's not a bad read, and James Robinson isn't a bad writer, nor is the art anything personally ugly, just off a couple times. Overall, it is definitely a read yourself and figure it out, but I can see this being more polarizing, especially since Scarlet Witch herself is kind of a bitch of a character to get right in the modern age. And if you are going to check it out, definitely don't wait for the trade. These covers by David Aja are almost worth the price of admission for the single issues themselves. Don't miss this Thursday when the new Honest Comic trailer for Injustice Year 2 drops. It'll be great, I swear. And if you want to suggest first issues for Flashback Firsty, then send me a tweet or a message on the Archivist Facebook page. Both links are in the description, or just leave a comment in this video below. Don't forget to click the subscribe button. If you agree or disagree, or even if I missed a comic that you think that I should have covered, then leave a comment below. And with that, stay golden, Inklings.